if anything, in a major phase of change right now with our economy and how businesses are going to start working and changing how their office structure or whatever. But data's been so important all along. It's going to be that much more important now. So without further ado, we're fortunate to have both Kathy and George Bruner with us today from Acumen Analytics. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Sean. So I just wanted to say hello and welcome to everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us and talk about how we can take a look at change and the ways that data can help organizations manage their way through it, and in some cases actually come out on the other side better by leveraging the data that they have within the organization. So what I thought we would do is we have a presentation, and then we can make sure we save time at the end for questions. And if you have them, you can post them in the chat, and I'll ask Michelle to keep track of them. And then, of course, at the end, we can have an interactive conversation. So I just wanted to go briefly through a little bit about us. We're going to share out this presentation at the end of the call. And so just a little bit about us. We've been in business for a little over 17 years now. We have a variety of individuals with a variety of certifications and capabilities. Microsoft, Tableau, a variety of different partners and partnerships. We bring a lot of knowledge and expertise to the table, and I'm fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of extremely well-qualified folks on my team, from process experience, technology, compliance and regulatory experience, validation and audit, and a big, I think, area that we bring a lot of expertise is performance optimization. So you can move, George. We have an advisory board that brings a lot of perspective and helps us in a lot of different ways. We have, some folks might know Dr. Malcolm Burgess, former Icon PLC, Bill Illis from Novartis, Ken Wilcox from Roche, and Michael Schmeiser from Sanofi. So we have a group of partners across a broad spectrum of the technology space in analytics and in general. So Microsoft, Tableau, as I mentioned, IBM, Oracle, etc. Can you, just a representative sampling of some of the work that we've recently worked, customers we've recently worked with are kind of across here. Some in the biomedical space, some in other areas of technology, building materials, etc. So just a little bit about what it is that we think sets us apart. It's really about the way that we approach, the way that we work with our partners, our customers, really in a partnership manner to help them transform data into insights. In a lot of ways, I think organizations struggle here to get their information into an effective format whereby the organization agrees upon what we like to call a single version of the truth, where everyone can see and agree. And when we talk about this number, it's the number for everyone. A harmonized and holistic approach to information, looking at the entirety of the way that it is across the organization and all the different ways that it's consumed and used. And the whole point behind it all is that empowering decision-making in order to turn information into action, right? Smart data, not just data. So it's taking all the data that is across the entity in the organization and strategically leveraging it and transforming it so that it informs and enables. So the idea here is about what the customer wants and what it is that we can do to help you move your entity or organization forward. We work in a lot of different areas in the life sciences, highly regulated industries, quality management, EHS, and other areas. We're trying to help organizations start to begin to talk about change and to manage change. So with that, I want to get into kind of what we want to talk about today. So the whole idea about change is, as there's a famous quote, if you remember any of your Greek history, that the only thing that is constant is change. So I think this is really compelling. We talk about change all the time. That's part of what it is that we work with. But in today's world right now, it's extremely relevant. And change can do a number of things, but it also creates opportunities. So there are a variety of different types of change. There's competitive change, right? If you do nothing, you can be overtaken by events. There's expansion and growth opportunity, which is change, new products, new markets. There's the normal course of business risk, the things that occur all the time. Employee turnover, market fluctuations, environmental things. And right now, in particular, which is probably one of if you're a student of history in the business world, this is probably one of the most unique points in time over the history of the record keeping of business events, if you will. In that, and if you're familiar with the term black swan, which is a totally unexpected, unpredicted event, something like 9/11, we've had 3 in the past 8-9 months. So we had the oil market incident, which was the first one towards the end of last year. We had the pandemic, and then on the heels of the pandemic, right here in the United States, and it's now spilling outside, is this whole unrest surrounding the racial tensions and inequality and riots and all of those kinds of things. So in the world of being able to manage and digest information in order to plan for what could be coming down the path, these are the things that folks struggle the most with. But in any event, change is continuous. Change can impact and does impact a variety of different areas of the business. There can be supply chain disruption. Government regulations are added or removed. Challenges with staffing, new ways of transacting business, which is what we're looking at right now, right? The new normal, digitization and virtual, contactless, like how do we go about this? What are we gonna do to understand this? And in my perspective in all of this is there's always a new opportunity. And the road forward is often much better than the road back. So I think taking that viewpoint is a way to understand what can businesses do now. And the way that we can enable the way for businesses to kind of begin to make those changes is with data. And every organization, regardless of their size, their market, their type of business, they all have data. It's in a variety of different locations. It's in a variety of different formats. Some folks have huge volumes of it. Some have smaller volumes and different types. We tend to categorize data in two buckets. The word bad data, I don't know, is we use the word bad data, but there could be a more adult way to talk about that one, and optimized data. But what we're trying to say here is data that's not in a good format or bad data is either sparse, meaning you haven't collected enough to make it material or valuable. Dirty data, which means that data's been collected and you've been gathering it, but it doesn't have the right information. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite examples is the date field, right? So if you guys, some of you may or may not remember when they captured 2-digit dates for everything, month, day, year, and didn't plan for the fact that when we turned to the year 2000, we would have 00, which means we could go back as far as 1900, or we could go to 1800. So this whole idea of collecting information, being forward thinking about it, and how it is that when we collect that data, it's going to be used. Siloed data. Siloed data is When you have lots of information and yet you can't get to it in a manner that allows for it to be reportable, you might have your HR data, and you could have manufacturing data. You can have social data. So you have all these different locations, but in order to get the best view, in order to get that wide angle of where it is that you might need to go, that data needs to be able to be aggregated so that you can get a total picture. And that's when I say like the single version of truth. You might have pictures of your customers in a variety of different locations, but to really see what your customer looks like, you have to have it all. Many organizations have transaction-based systems, accounting systems, payroll systems, purchasing systems, etc. There is an enormous amount of data captured inside of these applications. Sometimes those applications are on your location, and sometimes those locations or that data is in the cloud. Now the challenge can be, how do I marry up all that information and make it usable and turn it from data into information? Well, that's where we like to take and turn the conversation into being optimized, right? Optimized data is easy to access. You don't have to go through a normal, like an enormous gyration to transform it, run it through Excel, put it in a database, those kinds of things. It's complete. Everything that you think is a measurable item for a KPI or some way that you like to monitor or manage has been captured, and that data is fully populated. I think a key piece of it is that it's timely. So when we talk about reporting versus analytics, reporting is traditionally and still really remains to be historically captured, right? We look at the last 30 days, the last 60 days, the last year. When you begin to look at the timely and relevant data, you're getting that data near real time throughout the day, so that instead of looking at the past 30 days and wishing that you'd made a decision 15 days ago, you're actually in the data today, and you're thinking, wow, what can I do today, tomorrow, and next week? And then when I do make those changes, what did they affect? How did I what was my decision? And you know, this takes data and turns it into not just information and smart data, but now you begin to be able to learn, right? It's active. We'll call it agile. There's internal and external data. And when you optimize those data, that means you're bringing that application information that might be hosted, but in many cases, you can be bringing in external data such as regulatory body data, like the United States government or the European Union data sets. Enormous, massive pieces of data. You can do things like, again, in today's world, we can bring in COVID data. It's out there. Johns Hopkins is publishing it. AWS is publishing it. These are huge public data sets. And if you're in the life sciences space, they're talking about real world data. They're talking about actual information from real patients that can drive future outcomes, right? Better outcomes. And then data that's embedded in your process. That means that it's actively part of the everyday way that you go about your business. And that's where I think we begin to talk about how change and data together, or data together with change, can really begin to impact where it is that you can go as an entity or an organization. And I think the key part about the transformation from data to information is that data improves decision making. And the way that it does that is to make sure that the right information is getting to the right people at the right time in order to affect the changes we want to happen, right? Because it's easy to have data, or it's easy to have change affect our organizations and not have control over it. But the key to the success in the future is being able to be in control of it, right? Getting the information at the time that you need to be able to make that decision. And it might be the right or wrong decision, but at least you can make one. Because not making a decision, something still happens, right? And I have a note here, Forrester, who's a pretty well-known collector of information, they indicate that data-driven companies that harnessing insights will and implement them to create competitive advantage are growing at an average of more than 30% annually, which is a huge growth number. Another thing to note here is that there is a plan, I don't know what the date is, but they plan to add data as an asset on the balance sheet. And when and how organizations begin to quantify that means they're going to have to categorize it and understand where they have it and what it looks like in their organization, which is kind of a big thing, because once it becomes an asset, we can then monetize it, right? And monetizing data is a big thing. So to talk a little bit about data and how data can help answer questions, I think these are questions a lot of people ask all the time, and I think these are sometimes hard questions to answer, but the more data that you have that's been transformed into information, it allows you to kind of answer them or begin to dissect them at least. So, you know, data can tell you whether you're growing or shrinking, what's happening across our locations, and can we compare our locations? How do we know if we're actually improving over time? Can we measure whether or not our people are being trained in a timely fashion? This is very important for a lot of folks in manufacturing who have ISO certification, for folks in life sciences, and anyone else that measures training as a monitor of how they're performing as an organization and how well they're, how they can empower their employees. What are we doing compared to our competition? And this is where I like to talk about a little bit of the external information, like how are we doing? Because we can think we're doing well, but when we really look at the numbers, are what we think in line with what it is that we're actually doing? Rework, right? A huge area of conversation across many organizations. How are we doing? How often do we succeed without any rework? How do we prevent future incidents? What is it that we're doing? And if we're doing it, is it working? So what I have here is some representative examples of how some organizations, a little bit big on the screen it looks like, this is a dashboard that represents a variety of, I don't know if you can minimize it down, it came up really big. So this is just a, sorry, this gives you a sense of cost of goods, total number of stages, supply chain. So this is the story of the supply chain. This is really hard to see on the screen. So supply chain length. So it's 4 different visualizations that if there you go, maybe a little bit. If you're looking at a dashboard that gives a barometer of where we're going in the supply chain. If you want to go down to the next one. This is a dashboard that, again, kind of pulls together information about corrective actions, right? So corrective actions are things that either got reported that need remediation, or in some way they need to take an action in order to correct whatever's going on. You can see here that in the upper left-hand corner, you're looking at a trend over time. In the right-hand corner, we're looking at how it's occurring across regions. On the lower right, you can see geographic information now. These aren't interactive in this presentation, but if you were looking at these through the lens of the business intelligence tool that these are part of, you would be able to zoom in and identify. I think the key thing about the geographic representation in all of this is there's millions of data points behind this visualization, yet it's assembled in a way that really draws your eye to particular points, and that's intentional. And then, of course, you can see that if people want to disseminate the information, they can distill it, they can export it, and some things like that. So here's another kind of representation of how would we be looking at information in supply chain. And I think that as we talk about the environment that we're in today, and I think a lot of areas that organizations are really taking a look at with regard to change is the supply chain. Supply chain risks are high now. for any entities and organizations that have supply chain that comes in from outside of the United States. We're looking at things like how long is the supply chain? And there's a dynamic in organizations that, and this is kind of where I'm talking about the total picture. If we talk about suppliers, depending on where you sit in the organization, your view of the supplier is very different, right? If you're in purchasing, they always have an initiative to have as few suppliers as possible because it makes it easier to manage. And they have a greater leverage when they have small, when they have one or two suppliers that they can manage well. But if you're, say, perhaps in the manufacturing side of the house, and your suppliers either have trouble with materials, either they can't get it, or you've got suppliers that perhaps are producing defective materials that you're using, and some entities, for example, fully outsource their supply chain. So when you're thinking about what does the total picture of the supply chain look like, this is where you're trying to understand as an organization from a strategic perspective, what do we want our supply chain to look like and how do we get there? And I think that type of data is really hard to assemble. Like I said, there's many systems, there's many viewpoints. There's a lot of there's a lot of conversation about supply chain risk, but supply chain management, right? So I think this is, a big area where a lot of folks are focused. These are some representations of how people might be looking at it. We can, I think, go to the next one. This is a representation, again, this is the state of Virginia's, and this is another example of using external information to understand how you may be able to manage your business with regard to changing information, right? This is an active visualization that is updated every day. So if I was operating in the state of Virginia, or if I had suppliers in the state of Virginia, or employees, or any other members of my organization, you can see by county where you may or may not have to make a change or take an action that says, hey, maybe my suppliers are all located up there in the upper northwest part of the state. What am I going to do? Are we going to have impact on our ability to produce our products? Maybe I have customers in this area, and perhaps those customers are going to be affected, and how am I going to either reach out to them and see how they're doing, or perhaps I need to think about whether or not it's going to impact my own revenue stream because I have customers that are experiencing challenges. This type of information, like I said, is updated daily. This one you can see is last updated as of 6/24, and it's updated every day at 5 o'clock. I think some of this stuff is extremely compelling. And again, it's all about how do you manage change in a way that you as an entity or organization can at least have the right information to make the right decision, or at least make an informed decision, right? So I think the points that I feel are important when we talk about data and change. I think a lot of folks try and understand, what is that return? How do I quantify what it is that, it might be difficult to implement a process in order to maybe begin to move up that curve to greater insights and analytics, right? I think the key factors here are that analytics can help create and inform in days if you've got a well-built solution, or if you've got a good partner or an internal team. And analytics, rather than reporting, and I'm trying to make the differentiation between reporting, which we're all very familiar with, to analytics, is that I believe that the analytics deliver insights. And what I mean by insights is that you've got a view into maybe options, areas for improvement, or areas where you're not seeing what you were looking for as far as performance. But at least you're confident, right? Going back to this single version of truth, you don't get caught up in the, is this number right? You're more about what action can I take, right? And that's the key. Insights drive action. I don't know if I can, this is my personal, if I was going to have a flag. If you get the information in the hands of the people who can affect change, take action, that's true business impact. If the folks that need to drive change on the shop floor are not getting that data in a timely manner, and they're looking at last week or last month, it's too hard. You can't move that mountain. It's just very difficult. And once they do see the change and they see whether or not their decision was correct, and it's in the near time, they can make a second decision just as quickly. And change the course, right? More tacking rather than going all the way off to the right or left. And in order to make sure that those folks have the ability to create business impact, you need to have better data. And I think that many folks, in order to drive real value, this is the area that probably requires the most work. There's a lot of story out there about how quickly analytics can get you up and running and how, you can get data to the people and these things like that. But I think a caution about, and not to harp on this, but better data means better information, which means better decisions. If decisions are being made on inaccurate or sparse or incorrect data, then you're going to make poor decisions. And that's a learning curve too, right? So better data is optimized and harmonized. Again, not every piece of data is going to go into an analytics data set. There's millions of pieces of data, and you need to understand and get to the smart data that can be transformed. When we're talking about harmonizing data, that means across the organization, so that you can take the volume of data that helps you understand what the entire picture is, and then figure out how do you align to your metrics and goals. Again, about this single version of truth, I think this is a very compelling point. As soon as you eliminate the dialogue about whether or not the number's right, you can move the organization from that dialogue about getting the number right to taking action and affecting change. Better data means eliminating this process of extracting, and this is a representative application called Nexus. It's a fake application to kind of tell a story, but if you've got multiple production systems where end users are continuously accessing for extract, it creates a load on the application. That data then is removed from the application and siloed into, maybe pods of users or single users who then take and transform that data and make a set of, we'll call them, oftentimes it's Excel, and then create a report. And this is where it becomes a dialogue about whether or not it's right, what time was it, and the timeliness of it. Being able to have continuous and flexible updates. That's a key part of it, right? So there's not this exercise of being able to, it's just readily available. And I think that adds huge value. And then of course, brand reputation and customer satisfaction. I don't know if there's anything more important. Better decisions improve your brand reputation, which makes customers happier. Going back to rework and those things like that. So I think to kind of pull this all together and kind of sum up what it is I think that we're trying to kind of just communicate is that change is constant, and we should continuously plan for change. And if we can plan for change with good data, then we can position ourselves for success. Good data plus change allows us to be prepared and informed, to innovate, which I think is the key to success for almost every organization, in particular in today's world, and position for growth. I think if you look at it from the other side, and that is if you're facing change or you're trying to navigate change and you're not using good data, I think that the outcome is a little less positive and potentially can lead to a failure. And that's just kind of maintaining status quo, perhaps slipping and not being able to understand or navigate. It definitely creates a position where you have a challenge being able to react because you just don't have the information. And instead of being able to maybe better plan and create strategies, you're kind of waiting for when the next shoe might drop, or you're unprepared for a disaster, or some of the things that we talked about. I think that we're a little ahead of schedule, which I think is good. So I think what we could do is get to some questions. Are we able to turn on? I saw a question float by, but I wasn't able to. Can you see them in the chat, George?
Kathy, while you're waiting for that question, first of all, great presentation. But I look at this, and I saw a lot of companies, a lot of fantastic companies that you guys work with. But I also look at this as maybe a leveling of the competition for maybe smaller organizations. Can you talk a little bit? Is your client base all over size-wise, and does this allow smaller companies to, compete?
So our most of the work that we do is on the higher end of the mid-market and up into like enterprise class organizations, and that I think is simply because of the type of work that we're used to doing. Yeah, but for smaller organizations, and I think it's huge. I think it's a game changer. I actually would offer up that the larger organizations, George is making me seasick. So why don't you take this back?
Oh, just so you can show that.
So the larger organizations, they actually struggle with getting a project up and running. They might have to get, they need to get a PO. They might have to put it out to bid. There's a lot of different processes. Where a mid-market and a smaller organization, they're much more agile. In fact, we're not a large organization, and I think our ability to shift and change and understand the dynamics of what's happening makes us that much more valuable because we are agile and nimble. And they look at that as a big plus. So I think it's a huge game changer and opportunity for folks that are in that smaller area. I think their challenge though is they may not have the correct resources and able to enable them for that.
Thanks.
Kathy, we have a question. The question is, Kathy, does the collection of data fall to the company and employees themselves, therefore pulling them off other tasks? And if so, perhaps that's necessary for better outcomes?
Yep, so I think there's two responses to that. First, the answer is yes, it may be that it's a necessary action depending on the priorities of strategy within an organization. But that dialogue is often about how are we collecting the data? Do we have an application in place that is already collecting that data? And if so, now we're just extracting information from that application. If we have the application and it's not properly configured and we're not getting the data out of the application, that could be an exercise. So this is kind of these are kind of the sort of an assessment of where am I, what do I have as data, what is it that I'm trying to affect? And I like to talk about this as a journey because every time you shouldn't think that you can't start today. I think a lot of organizations think that they're so far behind that they'll never catch up. It's not true. Each and every step along the way opens up your eyes to something else. every one of these pieces of information that gets transformed allows you to take a look at something and go, oh my gosh, wow. And you can't change everything, right? So you got to kind of focus. That's kind of the strategy at the top of the house. And I feel like that's where you as an organization kind of figure out a strategic plan, put some action in place, and then figure out what it is that needs to occur. But, you know, starting
Can you
today.
talk a little bit about places where we've seen people that just do reporting because the process is not automated?
Right. I think that's a good place to look. So if I was going to start, it would be to kind of look at your organization and see where people are spending an enormous amount of time generating Excel spreadsheets for distribution, or if you've got a manual or paper-based method of collecting things. So automation is a big key, but there are big pockets in a lot of different areas where, you know, I hate to use the word timesheets, but that's an area sometimes where folks are still collecting them in a manner that doesn't make it easily reportable. Time allows you to see where people are spending their time, and if you've got, or even if you know, most managers know where their people are spending their time. You know, automation on the manufacturing shop floor, where can you, you know, safety is a big thing now. So how can we increase any safety actions that we're trying to take? Again, how do we collect the information? And I see someone trying to, go ahead.
I just have a comment that I'm in higher education for the last few years, and trying to bring the financial planning and analysis person on board and hire a person to lead this effort has been a challenge for budgets reasons. But I've found myself in prior private equity, venture capital, as a CPA, it is incredibly worthwhile to hire a person to lead this, a financial planning and analysis type person. It's been instrumental in getting, in my past, in helping get companies sold. And really, if you don't know your data, you really don't know where you're going. So I just want to make that comment.
I agree. There are, so it's a little bit of a conversation we might have, because I think a lot of folks want to then know, like, where do I get that person? Is it an internal role? Is it a position that I try and fill? Is it an external role where I bring in a consultant and I have some sort of project-based outcomes? And, you know, there's a couple of different ways to go about it. I think that this is talent. One, it's hard to find. And two, I think that when you're looking for talent, you might be looking for a combination to get the ball rolling if you haven't yet started, or if you've got a plan to begin. I think some folks that are maybe along the journey and maybe have stalled a little bit, sometimes need to reevaluate. I think executive sponsorship is key to the success of much of these initiatives. If your executive folks are not going to back the outcomes that need to affect what you've learned and change process, then you're going to continue to kind of iterate over the same challenges, like we might talk about rework. So if you can't get a product out the door the first time correctly, the majority of the time, and there needs to be something that's identified, and that change isn't put in place, you're just going to kind of continue to iterate in that position.
Right.
We have another question.
In finance, but what we find is that there's analytics pockets in different areas of the business. It may be in sales is doing their own analytics, finance is doing their analytics, and operations will be doing their own analytics. And one of the things that we often recommend is that we bring all of those analytics bodies together. You know, the one person in sales, the one person in finance that's analyzing the data, and start talking about how can we aggregate that data together. Kath had mentioned the repository, a single version of the truth, and the fact that you can't look at one bit of information without the full picture. An example I like to often quote is, you can look at complaints at a product level, but if you don't know and trend that over time, but if you don't know what the sales of that product are, it doesn't mean a lot. So in other words, your complaints could double, But if your sales quadrupled, you're actually doing better. So you really can't look at
Isolated.
data from your organization just from a financial or just from a sales or just from an operations. You really need to have that together. So
There's a question there. Michelle,
Yes, we have.
heard someone asking a question.
Yes, we have a question. Whenever we sense an opportunity for improvement, we mine our own data, albeit laboriously, to determine if there is information there to warrant driving positive change. That mining effort is initiated by a gut feeling. How does one productively mine data without a particular goal in mind? How do you ensure the time you spend on this mining analysis has a potential ROI?
So that's a good question. And I would offer this. I think that, you know, I can tell you the way that we kind of do this in conversation. I think you have to at least have an end or a goal in mind. There are ways and there are tools that can point at data and begin to give you some version of insight. But I think as an organization, most folks know that they want to achieve a certain set of goals. And I'll just use 2 examples. We'd like to improve our net promoter score 2% over the next 12 months. And if you know that that's the goal, and you take a step back from that and say, well, how do we measure our net promoter score, or our net promoter goal? And then you take a step back from that and you say, these are the 3 pieces of information that we measure it with. And you take another step back from that and you go, well, I'm missing 2 of those 3 pieces of information. You're not going to be able to measure it until you begin to collect it. If you want to start with the entirety of data that you have, it's a cool thing. I'm not going to say, like, that'd be something I think would be awesome and I would like to look at it, but I would suggest that you should have someone who has a sense of background in those kinds of things, because some things are modeling, right? So visualizations can give you information in a visual format, but the underlying modeling that allows you to understand that information, like George just alluded to, a poor calculation, you know, an average of an average, is an incorrect formula. So I think that's a big piece of how do you get to where you want to be. But to answer that question on its face value, there are tools out there that you can just point at data and they will automatically try and understand the correlations amongst those pieces of data by the application they came from, by the type of data that they are, and it will bubble up stuff and you can take a look at it, but then you kind of, again, you could get lost in that, but there's great value. I mean, it's about, I think, what you're really, and do you have the resources to do that, I think is a bigger question. I think there was another question. Was there someone? I thought I heard someone talking. No?
That's the last one that I have, yeah.
Okay, so I think that, so I had 2 questions that I had from someone that wasn't able to attend, and I was going to put this out to the group. The question that, one question I had was, is there an industry or area inside of an organization that if you haven't yet started, you think you should start, is one. And then the second one is, for the folks that are on the call today, where are they, or how do they view themselves in their journey? Like, are folks using tools? Do they have data? Is the majority of the application in Excel? So those were the two questions that I had that were put out to me. So I don't know if any of you guys have perspective on this, like in the variety of different businesses that you're all participating in. I heard higher education. I can see finance, maybe some legal areas.
I'll start if you want. We have an ERP system that's called Elution and Colleague System, and it's prevalent in higher ed. And it's the database structure is cumbersome. So we did a data warehouse, and we basically do a data dump of our ERP system into that warehouse, and then we dump data into Excel, basically. And that, believe it or not, in my past, working with Goldman Sachs and a lot of underwriting companies, going through sales of companies and things of that nature, due diligence, I asked these people, what are you guys all doing there crunching on your computer? And all of them come up with Excel, Excel, Excel. I said, there's got to be a better tool by this day and age with all the formula fraud errors in Excel, but there isn't. The high-powered investment banking firms still crunch everything through Excel, which I'm still amazed at.
Well, one of the things that we didn't really touch on in this conversation is information security, and I touched on a little bit with information as an asset, but how proprietary your information is to your organization and how much of a competitive advantage it gives you over your over your competitors. A lot of that information security is a big conversation when we talk about this topic. The cloud brings a lot of capability. It's secure. There's FedRAMP, so it's there's federal, there's private cloud. Some folks are still keeping their information data on premise, which is expensive, but in some cases they have to. Some folks are in between. They have some on-prem, they have some up in the cloud. You mentioned ERP systems and data warehouses. Scalability of the cloud allows, and someone, I forget, asked the question about whether a small business can take advantage of this. The cloud is the great equalizer. It's scalable, it's inexpensive, it's an entire IT infrastructure on demand at your disposal without having to hire all those resources. So it's a huge, huge win, especially in the small and mid-market. Now, up in the enterprise, they have a whole different strategy about it, but they're still leveraging it. To your point about Excel, there are a lot of tools, Power BI, Tableau, Click, Cognos, all being used in the financial space at different pieces and points. But I think the underlying personal calculator, if you will, is still Excel. But when you're talking about disseminating information across the information and readily consumable, and planned information for consumption, right? So when I was talking about data to the people, that's a pod of super sophisticated analysts who are allowed to have access to that data and do what they want with it and kind of manipulate it and scenario it. But usually an organization doesn't want everyone going out there and making their own calculations. They like a controlled view of what it is, the information is that they should get. Think about your banking app that tells you what your balance is and the transactions that you've got. But controlled access to information is also a big piece of it. And this is where organizations are taking data warehouses and building portals on top of them and embedding dashboards inside of those so that Kathy Bruner, are only allowed to have manager level information at your location for your particular business unit. And you, Michelle Delario, have, as the VP of Client Operations, has a view into all locations and all data. And this is where that ability to and to keep it secure, right? Some folks can only see the graphic representation and not the underlying specific data. It allows, so you can see a chart, but you can't see, I have 18% growth in my area, but I can't see which ones. Salesforce is a big, if you're familiar with it, Salesforce has that stratification of access. So I think you can get to it other than Excel, but I would agree with you. And that's a good starting point if you're looking to, because Excel reports, like you said, you can have errant formulas. People love to have power pivot and macros and all that kind of stuff like that. And if you need to have any information audited, the first thing that they do when they see an Excel spreadsheet is get me to the real data, because we don't want to see it right after you touched it. So there's a lot of ways to kind of talk about the conversation. Yeah.
With the new versions of Excel, they're very powerful, and you layer about Power BI on top, and that's what we've been using. And I think it's effective, at least in higher ed, because I think it's great. What do you like?
Yeah, and you guys have a lot of constituent management applications like Blackbaud, which you can marry up with some of your internal application information, and then you can have a very powerful picture of your constituents, which is, I think, pretty compelling. So I don't know if anyone had any other comments or questions.
None so far.
Well, if there's not any other questions, Kathleen, George, thank you very much for providing the content today. I think these webinars have been great for our membership to, get together, but also really good content on, learning about companies that we, are other members, and maybe we can find opportunities in our own business or opportunities that we come across that might fit, your needs. Next week is actually a week off from this, so hopefully everybody can enjoy the 4th of July weekend. And we're starting back up with Converge 1 on July 8th. So thank you all for attending today. And Kathy, George, again, thank you. And
Thanks,
Michelle.
everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Take care.
Thank you.